Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein, part of our collective Journeys in Torah. Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein. I'm Steve Geller, and once again, Rabbi Bernstein is going to show us the real beauty that lies just beneath the soil of our fertile Torah. This week in our parsha, Vayishlach Yaakov levado, and Yaakov was left alone, Vayavek ish imo, and a man wrestled with him ad alos hashachar, until the break of dawn. The Torah's account of Yaakov's struggle with the angel is intentionally cryptic. Not only aren't we told who this man is, we also don't know what the struggle was about. All the pasuk tells us as an opening to this episode is that Yaakov was left alone, and then suddenly someone is there wrestling with him. Also, the word the Torah uses to describe the struggle, vayavek, also needs our focused attention. Rashi explains that it comes from the root avak, which means dust, as in the dust that gets kicked up by people who wrestle. And this explanation also needs an explanation. Why refer to the struggle in terms of some secondary effect, the dust that might get kicked up, which itself is only relevant when the struggle happens in a place where there's dust? It's also interesting to think that this Rashi may be the source of the expression dust up to refer to a heated quarrel. The Gemara takes this imagery even further, stating, the avak, the dust from their feet, ascended to the throne of glory. This doesn't exactly clarify what was happening here. Dust doesn't naturally rise up that high. So what is the Gemara trying to tell us here, especially considering that Hashem's throne of glory isn't a physical object that dust could reach? Our next clue, Chazal tells us the reason Yaakov was alone was that he went back for some small jars that he had forgotten. Rav Yosef Salan explains that the reason we're provided with this background is because the fight was actually about those jars. The reason Yaakov went back for these small, apparently insignificant vessels is because his sense of divine providence was so strong that it was clear to him that if he came into ownership of these to begin with, they must have purpose in his pursuit of a higher spiritual existence. Esav's angel, on the other hand, rejects any notion of divine supervision over man's affairs, a position that allows Esav to act as he pleases with no sense of personal accountability. Whenever evil attacks a righteous person, it does so at the farthest extreme of that person's spiritual level. If a person prays 3 times a day without fail, the Yetzer Hara won't try to get him to make it 2 times. Instead, he'll encourage him to pray a little quicker or distract him in some other way. Here too, when the angel wishes to wrestle with Yaakov over his sense of connectivity to the divine, he begins with the most trivial of items, as in, even if you believe you're connected to Hashem in a general way, does that really mean that Hashem thinks these small jars are significant? And of course, the way these things work is conversations about small jars move into conversations about larger jars. From there, it's easy to move on to matters of greater significance. So we could say that Yaakov's struggle throughout that night was, don't give an inch, remain steadfast in his connection with Hashem without wavering at all, beginning with those small jars. So now it's just beautiful. If the jars are a symbol of insignificant physical matter, the Gemara takes this to the extreme, telling us the fight kicked up the most insignificant physical material that exists, dust, all the way up to the most significant physical representation, Hashem's own throne of glory, the very seat of Hashem's supervision over all man's affairs, big and small. The Vilna Gaon sees a beautiful example of this exact point in the blessing of Asher Yatzar, which we say after performing the most mundane of bodily functions. Blessed are you, Hashem, who formed man with wisdom and created within him openings and hollows. It's obvious and known, lifnei kisei kavodecha, before your glorious throne, that if one of them were ruptured or one of them were blocked, it would be impossible to exist. This is to emphasize that even the most basic matters are subject to ongoing divine supervision and expressed as being lifnei kisei hakavod, before Hashem's throne of glory. So now let's return to the Gemara's statement that they raised dust up to the throne of glory. We can now appreciate that this is not a description of the effects of that struggle, but of the struggle itself. Yaakov's task was to remain steadfast in his knowledge that all of Hashem's gifts matter, even the ones termed dust, even mundane bodily functions. All things are under the supervision of Hashem's throne of glory. The conflict between Yaakov and the angel was spiritual and ideological in nature, but also had ramifications in Yaakov's physical state, leaving him limping by the morning. This transition from the spiritual conflict to the later physical impact can be seen in a really fascinating way. The Torah tells us that Yaakov named the place where the struggle took place to express his gratitude for having survived the ordeal. In Pasuk 31, Vayikra Yaakov Shem Hamakom Peniel. Yaakov called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen the divine face to face, yet my life was spared. But curiously, in the very next pasuk, Vayizrach lo Hashemesh, and the sun rose upon him, Ka'asher Avar es Penuel, as he passed Penuel, limping on his hip. The name of the place shifts slightly from the one Yaakov called it one pasuk before. Why does the first pasuk call the place Peniel and the second call it Penuel? Rabbeinu Bechaya explains that these two names reflect the two different planes that Yaakov was on at these respective times. To understand how, let's preface by considering the different connotations of the letters Yud and Vav. The letter Yud represents spirituality. It's the letter with the smallest physical presence and the only one which does not rest on the surface of the line, but rather floats above it. Also, Yud represents the realm of thought, reflected in the fact that verbs in the future tense, which denote things that a person is thinking of, but which don't yet physically exist, all begin with the letter Yud. The letter Vav represents physicality. In a sense, it's a Yud with its leg extended so that it reaches the ground. The numerical value of Vav is 6, corresponding to the 6 days of physical creation. And finally, the word Vav itself means a hook or link, denoting the sequential cause and effect of physical actions. The first pasuk describes Yaakov when he was still on the spiritual plane where he had wrestled with the angel. As such, the name he gave to the place was Peniel, with the Yud, representing that sphere. The second pasuk describes the transition from the spiritual to the physical plane, which then left him limping. This physical transition is beautifully memorialized by the actual change in the name of the place, from Peniel with a Yud to Penuel with a Vav. But there's more. As we know, the injury that Yaakov sustained on that occasion becomes an actual mitzvah in the Torah. Based on that experience, we're not allowed to eat the Gid Hanasha, the sciatic nerve. On a practical level, though, most of us don't prepare our own meat, so this mitzvah is one we fulfill with no effort or thought. The Gid Hanasha is removed long before the meat is even available for us to buy. But perhaps, like Chazal tells us about the Karbonos and Galos, studying Parshas Vayishlach can provide us with an opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah by learning it, one of the first that we ever received. The commentators explain that the blow that the angel was able to inflict on Yaakov's thigh represents the idea that his descendants would not all have the same sense of connection with Hashem that Yaakov had. By placing the Gid Hanasha off limits for consumption by Yaakov's children, the Torah reminds us of this gap, one that we should work to close. We should focus on strengthening our connection with the throne of glory. And why should we do this? The pasuk later tells us that the sun rose upon Yaakov, with Rashi telling us that the sun shone on him to heal his lameness, allowing Yaakov to walk fully upright again. This beautiful explanation provides the inspiration for Yaakov's descendants to free ourselves of our limp, from our weak connection to Hashem, and to arise and reclaim our close relationship that is our heritage and stride steadily and confidently towards redemption.